This recording, I'm going to talk very quickly about the written first half of the aeronautical exam, aeronautical assignment. The first part has three sections, so what I'm going to refer to as 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. I'm only going to really talk about 1.1 and 1.2 in this discussion, in this video. So if I go to the assignment, 1.1 is part of industry research, as we're talking about the roles of various engineers and in the aviation industry. So the heading you could use for 1.1 is the role of engineers in the aviation industry, or Australian aeronautical industry is what I've included in the marking guidelines. You should talk about various disciplines, and you should be talking about different stages of the industry, so from design, production, and operation. So if you're looking at different industries, I have created a document on PowerPoint that I showed right at the start of year 11 that talks about different engineering disciplines, and it talks about what the roles of each of those disciplines are. That would give you a good starting point. Engineers Australia does provide areas of practice, which I've also included both of these things as recent uploads to the group chat, which you can see here, and also which goes into recent group files. If you look in files, it'll be there. Okay, so I'm going to show you a sample of what I would write if I was writing that essay. So in this case, I would write it in the format of an essay, aiming for about 500 words. I'd write an introduction. The introduction should have an opening sentence that indicates your position. So in this case, many engineering disciplines are related to the design, production, and operation of aircraft and related infrastructure. These include mechanical, civil, environmental, chemical, and I'll let you go on from there. So it should be either 2 sentences or about 5 sentences to start off that initial paragraph. That initial paragraph, which is the introduction. Then I'm going to call paragraph 1, which really should be body paragraph 1. I'm not going to change it, but this is the first paragraph within the body. In Australia, mechanical engineers, so straight away I know that this new paragraph is going to be about mechanical engineers. Mechanical engineers are involved in many aspects of the aeronautical industry. It also says in the marking guideline that you must talk about the Australian engineering industry, so I've made a point of putting that here. Aeronautical engineers are a specialization that, and then you can talk about the design. Then maybe in the next sentence you might want to talk about the operation or the manufacture. And then finally, so I've used a couple of different companies, so Boeing, Lockheed, and the Australian Air Force. There's some areas that you could look for to fill out that first paragraph in terms of design, construction, and operation, or design, production, and operation. So the next paragraph, I'm going to lump together both civil and environmental engineers. These are the two engineers that probably work the closest together. That engineers often help environmental engineers often help civil engineers to make sure that we meet the legal requirements, which you can look up. Civil engineers calculate loads to determine suitable pavement designs. I've used the word suitable twice. This is a pretty quick draft, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. But to determine pavement designs suitable for the aircraft traffic and of runways and other, I'll let you finish that sentence. Now I could have got that link from the Australian Asphalt Pavement Association, for instance, or various other sources. Environmental engineers design for and enforce legal requirements established by who establishes the legal requirements, who enforces those legal requirements. These would be the things that a environmental engineer would need to be aware of. So the same way that you would maybe talk about the operation, that they might be involved in the operation, or in the case of more the maintenance of things like runways, to make sure that they're running in a safe and efficient manner. Okay, so in paragraph 2, so that should say paragraph 3, but in paragraph 3 you might want to be talking about chemical engineers, or you might want to talk about, you might use Engineers Australia as your source there. You might want to talk about safety. Then after that you might want to talk about other engineering disciplines, which I've already talked about are available on this PowerPoint. Okay, so if I go to the next assignment, the next 1.2 is the impact of aviation on society, the economy, the environment, and vice versa. So I have given an alternative heading, which is social and economic environmental impacts of aviation. That's a good heading. You don't have to use it, but that's a suggestion. Now, I've specified here that you must refer to legal or ethical, health, and safety examples. So someone who doesn't include all of those will lose marks. Ideally, I would consider legal and ethical can kind of be lumped together, especially if you've talked about them in the previous paragraph. Health and safety are similar things. Okay, so these, when I say impacts and influences of, that means that it's a two-way street, that aviation has impacted these three things, and these three things have impacted on aviation design. So if I go to my sample essay here, so again, that should say paragraph 3, and it's body paragraph 3. That's why I don't change things while I'm recording. Okay, so the introduction. Aviation has both impacted and been influenced by our community values. Aviation has had negative impacts on the environment, but international pressure has caused engineers to design aircraft with less environmental impact. You have a sentence about economic. Social factors, especially World War II, have both driven the development of aviation, while aircraft has shaped our society. Okay, so our first paragraph is going to be, because we're following that same order, is going to be on environment. Firstly, environmental considerations are a factor of aircraft design. So you might want to talk about carbon emissions, which lead to climate change. Climate change leads to greater frequency and severity of natural disasters and increased food scarcity. You might want to talk about newer designs, how newer designs take into account these factors and design for these factors. Okay, paragraph 2, we're talking about economic factors. You might want to talk about how Boeing had a monopoly over the aircraft industry, especially in North America. You might want to talk about the need for government regulation and how Boeing was broken up into various companies. You might want to talk about seating and pricing. You could talk about the economic factors of air travel versus train travel. You might want to talk about how the privatization of the Sydney airport. These are all things that you could use to fill up that paragraph to increase your word count. In the third paragraph, finally, the development of the jet engine for use in World War II. So the jet engine was developed as part of World War II. Many of the technologies that we take for granted as part of the wide-scale production of planes was a direct result of World War II. A big social impact that was made possible by this aviation was the bombing of civilians, particularly in Dresden and Nagasaki, considered to be two of the most egregious examples of bombing of civilians. You could talk about many other aspects. You could talk about the increase in air travel. You could talk for tourism. Tourism is a huge part of the Australian economy. You could talk about air freight and that its impact on retail today. You could talk about migration and skilled trades and the increased international business when businesses can easily go and have meetings in other countries. We have knowledge can be more readily shared, and business contacts are more readily cemented when we have an international community that's supported by aircraft. And then finally, you'll write a conclusion, and so you might have more than one paragraph here. It might more than 3 paragraphs, but 3 paragraphs for me always seems like a pretty good idea whenever we are talking about social impacts, environmental impacts, and economic impacts. Finally, in the conclusion, you want to write maybe 2 sentences you could get away with, talking about one sentence talks about impacts, the other one talks about influences. You might want to go the other way where you reiterate each of the 3 paragraphs you've listed above. Hopefully that will give you guys some guide as to what to write if you haven't started already. Good luck, it's due on Monday.